This is TWiT.
All eyes are on TikTok this week. TikTok has been consuming my mind and my entire week, and writing a lot about TikTok. But I wanted to point to a story that I wrote about how creators on TikTok are thinking about the ban. And I think it's interesting to see the different responses where you have some creators that are really ardently literally working with TikTok to lobby. Last year, when the CEO Shou Chew first testified before Congress, there were creators that TikTok flew out to lobby for them and talk about how TikTok helped them start a business and how TikTok is now what they financially depend upon, or how TikTok has helped them communicate and learn things from people that they would never otherwise have met. And then on the other hand, some creators I talked to were like, hey, I'm not an expert on national security. I don't know if this is actually a threat from the Chinese government or not. And it's interesting to see that unfold on the platform itself.
Yeah, I mean, this has been, we knew about this a long time ago. This has sort of been tried before and was not successful at the time. And I talked last week to Abrar Al-Hiti of CNET, kind of as this was moving through in the first place. And one of the things we talked about was the interesting timing, because right now we have, it's an election year, and we know that President Biden's campaign is in part taking place on TikTok. And regardless of who is truly responsible for how this all shakes out, the person or people in charge are going to be held accountable for the changes that take place during that time. And so that alone I find fascinating. And I've seen anecdotally other people say that as well, that why are we focusing on this at all right now in the middle of an election year, and when there are much larger, more pressing issues at play? And there's one other thing that I want to say too. The last time we talked about the TikTok ban, way back whenever it was kind of first going through, that was the first time in a while that I had heard from so many of our listeners who were just absolutely anti-TikTok, upset, frustrated, bamboozled, bothered, etc., that we were talking about it as if it wasn't something that should just be a foregone conclusion. This time, I only heard from one person. So it's interesting to see that shift. I don't, again, that's anecdotally, but TikTok's been here for a while, and the U.S. government has yet to provide any proof that there's shisty things going on behind the scenes. TikTok continues to prove and insist and make clear that U.S. users' data is not stored in China. And so it's all very confusing, perplexing as to what is at the heart of this. Because I think to me, there's a difference between just on Security Now on Tuesday, a show that we do on the TWiT network. Steve Gibson was talking about something that China is doing at the moment. They're underway through a process that it's something, I think it's called -A or eliminate A or something like that. And it's the A stands for America. And it's not to eliminate America, it's to eliminate American hardware in its most precious systems. So the idea is that you wouldn't have any potential American influence interference in infrastructure and government and all of that within China. And many countries are doing that. Russia is the same way, not wanting to make sure that it's all Russian technology. China wanting to make sure it's as much Chinese technology as possible. The U.S. trying to reduce its dependence on having Chinese hardware, and in one way the security cameras within special zones like the Pentagon, et cetera, all having American-made security cameras as opposed to where they once were manufactured in China. And to me, all of that makes sense, right? I get that. But for a social media platform that, again, has yet to have anything proved out that it's nefarious and that is just a place where people are posting videos, I'm having trouble seeing why this is happening and why this is such a big thing. And yeah, I mean, from the creator perspective, Amanda, I'm curious, from what you've done the research there, like, are people worried about the loss of their income and, their ability to connect with their people? And is there any push currently to try to find other platforms, or are they still very much locked in for now, trying to see TikTok continue on?
I find this interesting because I think that regardless of anything going on with a TikTok ban, the number one advice that I hear creators give to each other is diversify your platforms, diversify your revenue streams. Like, if you have 100,000 followers on TikTok and like 1,000 on Instagram, then you should be concerned right now. I mean, I don't know if the ban's going to go through, but it must be very scary if your whole audience is on a platform that you're not sure you're going to have access to this time next year. And I think it's just a good lesson for creators generally that you need to be invested in multiple platforms and have multiple revenue streams, because you never know when something like this is going to happen. Even like we saw that with Vine. Vine just kind of disappeared, and there were a lot of people that had huge audiences on Vine but then struggled to move that audience to other platforms. So I think that creators should just always be thinking about how to make themselves as as resistant to any not resistant, but as immune to any random government dealings as they can.
And that's kind of frustrating, right? Because I look, plenty of people have plenty of feelings about the creator economy and the influencer personality and everything that entails, right? And there are legitimate critiques of that. But I think sometimes what's lost in those critiques and in the way that we can potentially look down on those folks is how that person, in so many cases, persona in so many cases is doing the job of like 12 people. They are themselves the talent. They are themselves their promoter. They are themselves their CFO. There's like, they have to play every single role. And then on top of that, to suddenly be faced with the complete loss of their income, or even like a huge, cut to their income. And in every case, these are folks who are self-employed. By that I mean the folks that are, completely dependent on the platform, self-employed folks. And there's already a bunch of like tax hurdles that are involved in that. Who knows how unemployment works whenever you're in that kind of like, that's just so stressful in general. And so in that way, I feel for the people who are, looking at this right now, who are maybe going to be faced with the idea that the government itself is coming for their job. And like, that's scary, because there's only so much that one can do if it were to go through. Now, we know that TikTok did put out a sort of pop-up, a little interstitial saying, hey, call your legislator, the TikTok might be banned. I think that's really fascinating, given how I think that is potentially a huge mobilization. But the problem with that is that it does kind of prove the point in a way for those legislators who are going, see what it can do? What if they decided to make a pop-up that said, don't vote this year because voting is bad? How many, you know what I mean? And I think that almost kind of exacerbated the situation. So it's a really frustrating thing, I'm sure, for everybody involved when it comes to, and by I mean like literally everyone involved, the people who just like to watch TikTok, the people who are making their living on TikTok, the people who run TikTok, the government who are involved in the legislation and voting on it. Everybody's frustrated. And where I'm frustrated, and where I would imagine you may be frustrated too, I won't speak for you though, so you can let me know, is let's picture a world where TikTok is banned. Just because it's banned, just because the government says to Apple, you may not put this app in the App Store, and says to Google Play, you may not put this app in the Google Play Store, does not mean that there won't be means of accessing TikTok through some other method. And I can already foresee the problem that comes along with that, because if my youngest brother is any indication, sometimes people will just find a tutorial and they'll follow through with the tutorial and not consider the implications therein. He jailbroke his iPhone many moons ago and had somebody basically able to see what he was doing on his iPhone, gaining access to his passwords and all of that kind of stuff, because you don't have those same protections in place. And so if the government is concerned about the potential security implications of TikTok itself, just imagine what it's like if it is in a completely unregulated, unknown space and everybody's installing it. I think I said last week, is it not better to have the devil you know than the devil you don't? And I say that with like a lowercase d for devil and almost in quotes, because again, I don't think it's been proven that TikTok is a devil in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there is no evidence of the Chinese government accessing American TikTok data, but there is evidence of ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, accessing American TikTok data. And then the question is like, so from that conclusion, can we jump to the Chinese government has access to American data? And then if we take that a step further, I think, one, there's the question of, so if they do have that data, what are they going to do with it? Are they actually going to be able to carry out like an influence campaign on TikTok? Like Ted Cruz tried to ask Shou Chu, the CEO, when he was testifying in Congress, like, what happened in Tiananmen Square? And he answered the question. You can go on TikTok. There are videos about things that the Chinese government doesn't want people talking about because it's not a Chinese app. But at the same time, like, there is a lot we don't know. And I understand the skepticism, but I think it does feel like political theater, especially there's the age-old issue of, but what about the data brokers? And how like every time there is legislation about internet security, there are like a bunch of tech people on Twitter, like, when are they going to pass legislation that makes data brokers less able to just do whatever they want with our data? Like, they could sell it to Chinese companies if they wanted to. And then like, you don't need to ban TikTok to that's not going to prevent Chinese companies from getting our data if that is really what this is about for these legislators.
Thanks so much for watching this little chunk of Tech News Weekly. If you'd like to get the full episode, well, head over to twit.tv/TNW. There you'll find buttons you can click or tap to subscribe to the entire show in audio and video formats. Or just look in the description. We've got links down there as well.